So, good morning, colleagues. A very warm welcome to this very exciting CSW70 side event. We really appreciate your presence here today. We know it's quite early and very busy schedule for all of us, so we really appreciate it. We have a lot of participants online, and we understand that some of the participants who were supposed to be here in person, some applications were declined. We had some issues with the visas, but we appreciate that at least they can participate online. We have very interesting interventions today, lots of good information. So we really appreciate it that we start on time. Please take your seats. And some formal acknowledgements about excellencies. We have some ministers here. We have some online as well, distinguished delegates and colleagues. It's really our pleasure to welcome you to this side event, the third day of CSW. I hope you are all holding well, moving from meeting to meeting, but very, very exciting. I'm personally very excited about the theme, the priority theme, access to justice. And of course, when we're talking about access to justice, violence against women and access of survivors to justice is really an integral part of UN Women's work, and we're going to hear more later. And unfortunately, despite the global attention we have, the action by so many different governments in order to advance legal and policy reforms and having prevention and response strategies in place, we still have a lot to really advance and to make sure that we progress, we really address the implementation gaps that we really see on the ground. And that's why it's so important that when we want to advance, we really need to have the right data and the right policies in place, which are evidence-based, informed by data, informed by evidence, in order to make sure that we give the right advice to our partners and that we move forward sustaining, first of all, the results that we're having in place. And that's why we're having this event today, because we're very excited to have different policymakers with us, researchers, and the World Bank Group. It's very, very good partners of ours in order to inform us about what is up to date regarding research and evidence. And we're very excited to share with you two emerging initiatives today. One is the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Index, and we're going to hear about it later. And the second one is the Policies for Prevention Initiative. Together, these tools will provide a roadmap for effective legal and policy reforms, and we very much hope to have some groundbreaking research and analysis around that. I would like to warmly acknowledge our partners here who accompany us in this event. And they have contributed to the initiatives being explored today, including, as I said, the World Bank Group. We have the new Gender Equality Director here with us, the Prevention Collaborative, the Sexual Violence Research Initiative, and the Economist Impact. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Her Excellency, Ms. Maha Ali from Jordan. Thank you very much for being here, Your Excellency. And Her Excellency Chandrai Esteves Zorrilla from the Dominican Republic. Thank you so much for being here. And Rachel Grant from the United Kingdom. We're very grateful for the thought leadership of these member states and other governments that we have in the room today in order really to advance national policies on the ground and to make sure that we have good practices that we can replicate elsewhere. Finally, I would like to acknowledge the unwavering support of the European Union. And through the Spotlight and through the ACT program to end violence against women and girls, that really enabled UN Women to provide critical support to women's rights movements, but also to some significant research. And under this program, we have engaged over 750 organizations in spaces for feminist solidarity, a strategic engagement. And also this support enabled us to develop new tools like the VAWG index that we're going to hear about later today. Let's have some opening remarks in order to set the stage and prepare us for what we're going to hear later. I would like first to invite Ms. Sarah Hendricks, the Director of the Policy Program and Intergovernmental Division at UN Women. Sarah's leadership has been instrumental for advancing gender equality and linking the ending violence against women and girls with our thematic areas of political participation, economic empowerment, women, peace, and security. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much to Calliope for setting this stage today, and a very warm welcome to all of you, excellencies and distinguished colleagues and friends. Thank you for being with us this morning. We hope that you feel welcome here at UN Women, as this is our collective home. We are gathered here today because of a shared commitment that violence against women and girls is preventable, that it is indeed preventable, and ending it is our collective responsibility. However, it continues, as you all know, to be one of the most pervasive and persistent human rights violations affecting 1 in 3 women worldwide. And we've just heard some new regional data that's just out also across the European Union that reaffirms that consistent, persistent statistic of 1 in 3. And this is certainly despite global commitments, it's despite landmark conventions, national action plans on violence against women, it's despite also the courage and the tireless advocacy of women-led and women's rights organizations and movements everywhere. And we see this persistence in the way in which this needle is so challenging to move. Global prevalence of intimate partner violence has declined by only about 0.2% annually over the past 2 decades. So as we begin today's important event, it is critical that we ask ourselves collectively and that we reflect quite honestly on what will it really take to finally move that needle. I believe a significant part of the answer is that we have not yet fully harnessed evidence and solutions that are based also on data and the power of policy. Ending violence against women is a top priority, and we saw this in the member state reports on the implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, where 88% of the over 160 reports provided by member states actually said that they are making this one of their top priorities of focus in their countries. And despite this, governments in many places are working nevertheless without clear evidence of what can really drive change at scale for entire populations, so at population level. And community-based prevention interventions certainly are vital. Specialized services for survivors are absolutely essential, but they alone cannot shift population level prevalence. And this requires, of course, as we know, comprehensive legislation, policies, budget allocations, but also cross-sectoral action. And this morning, as Calliope, our chief of the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls work here at UN Women highlighted, we will introduce 2 emerging initiatives that we hope will help to fill some of these gaps. The first is the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Index. This is developed by UN Women and research partners SVRI and the Economist Impact, funded, of course, by the European Union under the Act to End Violence Against Women and Girls program. It is a first of its kind global tool that will allow us to benchmark as well as compare how countries are performing on the very measures governments can actually directly control. So laws, institutional frameworks, as well as investments directly in prevention and response. And we hope that this will be a mirror of sorts, a mirror that brings data and evidence, but that can be held up to member states and also a roadmap for steps to follow to alter course. The second tool that will be launched today is called the Policy for Prevention Initiative. And this is led by the Prevention Collaborative, together with the World Bank's Africa Gender Innovation Lab. It is a rigorous synthesis of evidence on which policies and reforms actually lead to and drive reductions in violence. Whether that's family law or property rights, whether that's social protection or education policies, or whether it's new policies also on women's economic inclusion, this initiative really shows us that the tools of prevention are broader and they are also more actionable than we perhaps may have thought. Together, these two initiatives will enable more targeted legal and policy reform and have the potential, I think, to move that persistent needle. As I close, allow me just to say that UN Women is honored to be part of this work at country level and to drive forward efforts to advance systemic change to end violence against women and girls. And together with so many partners that are here in the room and that are also online, our work has, I think, humbly but steadily moved forward to ensure that 30 countries have adopted, revised, or repealed 148 laws, providing better protection to the 1.36 billion women and girls that live within those countries and the 2 billion women that live in countries that have put in place effective prevention measures. We've also supported 68 countries to adopt 490 gender-responsive national and local multi-sectoral policies or strategies or plans, something of the sort, that actually addresses issues that matter for violence against women and prevention, things such as equal pay, the economy of care, as well as environment and climate change. And we've worked with member states across 43 countries, again, seeking to improve the services that survivors receive. And this includes through new and updated guidelines, working with the police, with health workers, with social workers, and with justice actors. So I believe much of the work that you will hear from across so many inspiring partners today holds potential to really advance our progress globally around the world on ending violence against women. I think what emerges from this index, as well as from the Policy Prevention Initiative, is going to be really important. And we stand alongside those important initiatives, as well as the partnerships from member states, from the World Bank Group, from civil society organizations, to really translate this evidence into action. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for setting the stage. And now I have the pleasure to invite Mr. Robin Means, the World Bank Group Director for Gender. And the World Bank has been such an important partner in advancing prevention and responses, research, and policies on gender equality and violence prevention, including, of course, the famous Women, Business and the Law Index, and the Policies for Prevention Initiative through the Africa Gender Innovation Lab, and we're going to hear more about it. So we're really thrilled to have Robin with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Calliope, for the very kind introduction. It's really an honor and a pleasure for us from the World Bank Group to be part of this event and to partner with so many key leaders in this field. Excellencies, colleagues, friends, really a pleasure to be here today. So I'll try not to repeat too much of what Sarah's already shared, because these are some well-known framing statistics. We have heard, of course, violence against women and girls is absolutely one of the most widespread human rights abuses and violations in the world. And as Sarah's just shared, the latest global estimates confirm that 1 in 3 women worldwide have experienced physical or sexual violence in their lifetimes. And this has remained very stubbornly persistent for decades. Despite decades of effort, we're really not seeing the needle move very much, as Sarah has said. And it's a stark reality that reminds us that while we have tools, policies, and understanding that's really advanced. It's prevalence that really needs to start coming down, and making efforts on prevention at scale absolutely imperative, an urgent policy priority. Certainly for us in the World Bank Group, it is the first and key pillar of our World Bank Group gender strategy, and something that we're devoting as much attention to as we can. The good news is that we now know much more about what actually works to prevent gender-based violence. Thanks to the work of practitioners and researchers, including many here in the room and online, we have robust evidence and toolkits of proven prevention approaches that can reduce violence at the level of couples, households, and communities. But achieving reductions in prevalence at scale, by definition, means going beyond small-scale interventions. It really calls for very strong government action across sectors, grounded in policy and legal reform, to shift incentives and systems towards prevention and not just response. And that's why the initiatives that are being highlighted in today's session are so critically important. They provide governments with concrete, evidence-based guidance on how to translate knowledge into action, an investment that can deliver widespread reductions in violence. So first, we're going to hear about the End Violence Against Women and Girls Index. And this offers a comparative, evidence-based picture of government action across three pillars: the enabling environment, prevention, and response, focusing on areas that governments can directly influence through legislation, policies, budget allocation, and institutions. And the second initiative that we're going to hear about is the Policies for Prevention initiative, synthesizing evidence on policy and investment options that go beyond criminalization, highlighting reforms that can shape women's economic and social conditions, from education to social protection to labor markets and survivor service provision. All of this work goes absolutely to the foundations of development. Without safety and freedom from violence, women and girls can't fully build human capital, access economic opportunities, or exercise leadership. So responding to this really calls for sustained action across all sectors. Governments and partners are advancing reforms to prevent and reduce violence, increasingly through policy and legal change. And we're already seeing this reflected in policy reform efforts. Over the past 2 years, more than 20 government-led reform programs supported by the World Bank Group have incorporated measures to prevent or respond to gender-based violence, signaling rising demand from governments to tackle GBV through laws, policies, and institutions. In Uzbekistan, for example, recent policy lending supports the Labor Code amendments to ban workplace sexual harassment and GBV and introduce paid leave for survivors, helping foster safer workplaces and promoting dignity, security, and well-being. So looking ahead, tools like the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Index and the Policies for Prevention evidence synthesis can help all of us sharpen priorities, strengthen what works, and focus investments where they can have the biggest impact, supporting governments, informing operations, and amplifying global advocacy so that women and girls can live safely and thrive. So thank you very much to UN Women and other partners for bringing us all together for this event. I'm really looking forward to the discussion and to learning from the evidence and the country perspectives that are going to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Robin and Sarah, for setting the stage so well. And now we're going to get into the technical discussions. You have heard about these two initiatives. So I would like to invite here Ms. Yeliz Osman, Dr. Lori Heisey, and Dr. Rachel Pierotti to join me for this first segment of the discussion. We also have Ms. Shubhangi Pantni, Senior Analyst at Economist Impact, and Ms. Sagita Chatterjee, Research Director at the Sexual Violence Research Initiative, joining us online. I can see them already there. And we can start already with the presentation of the forthcoming Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Index, developed by SVRI and Economist Impact, and been under the EU Act program. And Ms. Yelis Osman, she's a policy specialist in the team of the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls. She's the mastermind behind the EVAWG index, I have to say, and she's leading our ACT program, among other things. So Yelis, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Calliope. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us. I know it's a very busy time, so we're really pleased to have the opportunity to share the forthcoming Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Index with so many of you during CSW. So as Calliope mentioned, this work is being developed by our research partners, SVRI and Economist Impact, and you will be hearing from them shortly, and they'll be presenting the forthcoming Ending Violence Against Women and Girls framework. But just to get us started, I wanted to provide a little bit of background and context on the development of this initiative. So as Calliope mentioned, this Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Index is being developed under the EU-funded Act to End Violence Against Women and Girls program, which is an ambitious 3-year program that's focused on strengthening women's rights movements, coalition building, and global advocacy on ending violence against women and girls. And I think we all know that to strengthen advocacy and evidence-based advocacy, we really need to ensure that civil society, women's rights organizations have access to up-to-date data, not only on prevalence rates and levels of violence against women and girls, but also on what measures member states are putting in place, how states are addressing violence against women and girls, what kind of commitments they have at the international level, what laws, thank you, what laws, policies, strategies, and programs they've adopted, and importantly, what levels of financing are being injected into ending violence against women and girls. And as I mentioned, this is critical for advocacy, but also for monitoring and accountability. So this new Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Index has been inspired by other global indices, including, as mentioned, the World Bank's Women, Business and the Law Index. It's also been inspired by Laurel Weldon's work on feminist mobilization and looking at the intersection between feminist movements and efforts to end violence against women and girls. And it's also been inspired by the Together for Girls Out of Shadows Index, which is also developed by Economist Impact. It's going to also build on and complement existing tools such as the UN Women Global Database on Violence Against Women and Girls, which is a one-stop shop that includes measures that member states have put in place to end violence against women and girls, and it includes around 10,000 measures from 194 countries. But the index will go further by providing an assessment of the comparative relative performance of countries, highlighting what some of the critical gaps are that remain in their national prevention and response systems. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So why the development of an Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Index? First, it's important to note that it's putting the spotlight, it's not about putting the spotlight on countries or naming and shaming countries that are underperforming or that are not doing so well in terms of their efforts to end violence against women and girls. It's really much more about enabling more targeted policy and legal reform. As Sarah has shared, we know that globally, ending violence against women and girls is a top priority for member states, for 88% of member states. And we also know that over 80% of member states have introduced and strengthened laws and national action plans to end violence against women and girls. So what we're really looking to do through this index is understand why it is that despite this progress, despite these commitments, levels of violence against women and girls are not decreasing and they remain persistent. So our aim is to provide member states with tailored pathways to support their individual journeys, which we hope will have greater impact. And second, we hope that the index will enable countries to compare their performance with their regional peers and to inspire them and to enable them to identify good practices and what's working elsewhere, particularly looking at other countries within their regions and that have similar contexts and challenges and opportunities. Third, the index will be filling a critical gap in our ending violence against women and girls ecosystem by bringing together all of this information in one place. I think currently there are different indices that maybe tackle aspects of what we're looking at here, but this is the first time we'll comprehensively have one index bringing all this information together. And we feel that this will make the data much more accessible to women's rights organizations, civil society, so it can help strengthen their evidence-based advocacy using rigorous and robust data. And finally, we really hope that the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Index will drive resource allocation. For those of us that work in this field, we know that ending violence against women and girls efforts are chronically underfunded. So we hope that an index of this nature can really help development actors and funders to see where resources would be most needed, which specific countries and contexts, and what to fund where. So I think I will now hand over to my colleagues Sangeeta and Shubhangi at SVRI and Economist Impact to walk us through in more detail what the index will cover, what the framework is looking like. Thank you. Over to you, Sangeeta.
Thanks so much, Yeliz. And as Yeliz noted, the EVAWG index is designed to give us a clear picture of how countries are doing in terms of addressing violence against women and girls. The index does this by highlighting the current state of violence prevention and response systems. This includes different things such as laws, policies, governance frameworks, funding, and different services that are available to survivors. In the index, we focus on indicators that governments can directly influence, such as legislation, budgeting, and institutional mechanisms. We do not include data on prevalence, and I'll come back in a bit to explain why this is the case. And our hope is that by tracking these areas, the index can show us where progress is being made, what policies are actually working, and areas where more coordinated effort is needed. The goal overall for us is to make data easy to access and use. We hope to encourage collaboration across different stakeholders in the violence prevention field by making data openly available as well as easy to understand to encourage shared learning and collective action in the field. Next slide, please. So the index is built around three main pillars or groups of indicators: enabling environment, prevention, and response. The enabling environment pillar looks at the bigger picture, the systems and structures around violence prevention. This pillar captures the legal and institutional landscape, focusing on political commitment, the implementation of laws and policies, and the allocation of resources. Drawing on the respect framework, these factors strengthen the enabling environment to both prevent and address violence. The second pillar, on prevention, focuses on the root causes and drivers of violence, like harmful social norms, gender inequality, and lack of opportunities for women and girls. The goal here is to include indicators that can lead to long-term change, hopefully shifting behaviors and attitudes so violence becomes less likely to occur in the first place. The last pillar, the response pillar, is about what happens after violence occurs. This pillar includes indicators that looks at whether survivors can easily access safety, justice, healthcare, and other forms of support. Together, these three pillars should give us a full picture of how governments are tackling violence against women and girls in their different contexts. This conceptual framework was guided by research on different theoretical frameworks to understand the drivers as well as impacts of violence against women and girls. One of the key frameworks we drew on is the socio-ecological model developed by Laurie Heisey, whom we will hear from very soon. This model helps us look at violence at different levels of society, which we have tried to reflect in our choice of pillars by including indicators looking at the individual, family, community, and societal levels. To make sure that our index was strong and credible, we also reviewed other existing indices in the field. This helped us identify which indicators are commonly used, what data sources are available, and how measurement is usually done. Finally, we didn't do this work alone. We brought together diverse experts from different fields. Next slide, please. We created an advisory group to guide the development of the EVAWG index. And this group is made up of more than 20 global experts from different fields, including researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. The advisory group provides expert advice, technical input, and feedback at every stage of the process. Their contributions have helped shape the conceptual framework, the main pillars, as well as the scope of the indicators of the index. These consultations were very important for us because they ensure that a wide range of perspectives and expertise are included in the development of the index to make it useful for different stakeholders in the field. Next slide, please. And together with the advisory group and based on extensive desk research, we developed some core principles to guide our choice of indicators. Chief among them is our choice to focus on inputs and not outputs. We do not include any data on the prevalence of violence in our index. Data on prevalence is available, but as a background indicator and not as part of the main index. Instead, our index looks at actions countries can take, like passing laws, creating policies, and running programs to prevent and address violence. These are the building blocks that can help drive real change. By focusing on these input indicators, we also avoid double counting, since most indicators are closely linked to and can predict prevalence data. For example, when a country makes domestic violence illegal by law, that should usually influence the levels of domestic violence in that society. We avoided using any subjective measures based only on opinions or beliefs, since those can vary by culture. Instead, we used indicators backed by expert consensus and observable different evidence. Each indicator had to matter and be relevant at the national level, something that can support advocacy and help push for real policy change. We also relied only on data that is publicly accessible, regularly updated, and covers a wide range of countries, so the index is easy to update in the future as we move forward. And lastly, we made sure that indicators highlight a clear direction of progress so that when countries improve, it shows up clearly in the scoring, and when they don't, that's visible as well. I'll now hand over to my colleague, Shubhangi, to take us through the rest of the presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sangeeta. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So keeping in mind the principles that Sangeeta just walked us through, we wanted to take you through the structure of the index framework in a little bit more detail. And essentially, as Yeliz and Sangeeta have mentioned, we have structured the index framework around 3 core pillars. These are enabling environment, prevention, and response. Each pillar is then divided into certain subcategories or sub-pillars is what you can think of them as. And these subcategories highlight specific dimensions within the broader area that the pillar seeks to cover. Each subcategory also contains a set of quantitative or qualitative measures that measure particular aspects of the issue that the broader pillar seeks to cover. To that end, the first pillar on enabling environment looks at the broader policy and institutional context that supports efforts to address violence against women and girls. So within this pillar, you have subcategories that focus on countries' commitments to international agreements, the effectiveness of national government plans and strategies, and laws and institutional mechanisms in place to protect women's rights and ensure accountability when violence actually occurs. The second pillar focuses on prevention and essentially examines policies and societal factors that help address underlying drivers of violence. For example, this pillar considers the extent to which education policies address violence against girls in educational institutions. It also considers issues like whether women and girls have access to economic opportunities and protections, and the extent to which women are represented in leadership and decision-making roles across government, business, and civil society. The pillar on prevention also looks at whether women and girls are able to participate safely in public life, whether there are efforts to challenge harmful gender norms and attitudes that typically contribute to this type of violence, and whether countries systematically collect and report data on the prevalence of violence against women and girls. Finally, the third pillar focuses on response, and essentially it assesses the systems in place to support survivors of violence. And this includes areas like whether governments systematically collect and publish administrative data on responses to violence, the availability and quality of healthcare services for survivors, and the capacity of the justice and policing systems to provide timely as well as survivor-centered support. In addition to that, this pillar on response also captures the provision of essential social services, which we know play a critical role in helping survivors recover as well as rebuild their lives. So taken together, these indicators, as Sangeeta mentioned, provide a comprehensive picture of how countries are working to prevent violence, respond to survivors, as well as strengthen the institutional environment that is needed to address violence against women and girls at large. And based on this framework, the index will essentially benchmark countries' efforts towards preventing and responding to violence against women and girls, and essentially present the results in the form of country-level scorecards, which we will get to in just a second. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So here what we have is a sample country scorecard to give everybody a sense of what those country-level results will look like in practice. And to develop these scorecards, countries are first assessed at the indicator level, after which the data is aggregated at the subcategory level, as well as the pillar and the overall index levels. And the idea really is to provide a clear and accessible snapshot of a country's performance across the three pillars of enabling environment, prevention, and response. In addition to that, country scorecards are also meant to serve as tools that can help identify both areas of strength as well as areas where there might be some scope for improvement, which can help inform more targeted policy interventions going forward. So overall, these scorecards are designed to support more informed discussions around policy progress and priorities for action. In terms of the output of this entire EVAWG index program at large, in addition to these country scorecards, as well as the index model that will also be available to download from the hub once it's live, we'll also be developing a key findings report that will analyze the results of the index in more detail, as well as other outputs that would potentially focus more on, findings specific to regions and income groups. I also wanted to take this opportunity to flag that as one of the aims of this program is to make data on violence prevention and response more accessible for advocacy purposes, we are exploring the idea of developing resources to help guide users as they navigate the index results and related materials on the website. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of what does the country coverage of this index looks like, the index currently covers 152 sovereign states, which collectively represent around 95% of the world's population. There are only 44 countries that were excluded from the index due to significant data gaps, as including these countries in the absence of sufficient data would have risked unfairly penalizing them and skewing overall index results. The list of excluded countries is provided on the slide. And with that, we've come to the end of our presentation on the EVAWG index. I believe we have some time designated for Q&A towards the end of the event. So all three of us, Yali, Sangeeta, and myself, we'd be very happy to take any questions then. But for now, thank you everyone for your attention, and handing back over to you, Calliope.
Thank you so much, Yelis, the Economist Impact, and SVRI for this really wonderful collaboration and research. We very much hope this is a groundbreaking index, I have to say. And also, we very much hope the governments and partners, they're going to see themselves where they are at in their journey, because it is a journey to end violence against women and girls at country level. And while they assess their policies and their laws and see where they're at, how they're doing with their prevention programs and responses, we really have to assess what kind of policy reforms are most likely to reduce violence. And that's why we're very excited to have the second segment of this discussion, which is called the Policies for Prevention Initiative. It's a collaboration between the Prevention Collaborative and the World Bank's Africa Gender Innovation Lab. This work examines the growing body of evidence on how policies across sectors, such as family law, social protection, education, labor markets, and justice reform can contribute to reductions in violence against women. So I would like to invite Dr. Lori Heisey. She's the co-director of the Prevention Collaborative and, of course, a globally recognized expert on violence prevention. And your work, Lori, and your research has really advanced the prevention work the last decades. And then she will be joined by Dr. Rachel Pierotti, senior social scientist with the World Bank's Africa Gender Innovation Lab, where her research focuses on gender norms, economic opportunity, and policies affecting women's well-being. So, Lori, the floor is yours.
Let's see how this works. Okay, great. Good morning to you all. It's really a pleasure to be here. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the origins of this effort. As I don't know if I have slides too somewhere, but anyway, as you've heard, we've made a lot of progress in the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years around figuring out what some of the policies, or excuse me, what some of the strategies are that are effective at reducing levels of violence. And if you go to the next slide, I have just a kind of example of some of the ones that have emerged in terms of being effective through kind of rigorous evaluations and impact assessments. And what you see is there's a lot of work that happens at kind of a group level or a community level. So we know that through properly implemented and trained facilitators with good curricula, working with couples or working with families over time, building skills in those families around communication and changing sort of aspirations of division of labor and things in the family, we can actually see reductions in violence over the course of 4 or 5 months and then continuing on. We also see that in parenting programs, and parenting is a really important intervention because if done with a gender lens, we're able to both reduce intimate partner violence and violence against children, as well as achieve certain other kinds of outcomes like early childhood development or child nutrition and stunting. So it's kind of a nice package of things that you can do that really make a difference for women, children, and families. We've also seen some work at a community through community mobilization. Many of you heard of the SASA program. Some of these, again, they are working with lay people who are trained to then help shift norms and attitudes and beliefs at a community level. One of the problems, and I think we've already heard this, with these strategies is they're effective, but they're difficult to scale. And so every time that you want to do it and expand it, you have to train new people, you have to adapt it to a new setting. And while I think that's perfectly doable if you have the political will and the investment, it's a hard thing to sell to governments because the honest truth is that is not the core wheelhouse of governments. They oftentimes don't have the workforce or even necessarily the community trust in order to lead this kind of effort. And so we've really reached sort of an impasse, or not an impasse, but a challenge that we need to really address, which is how do we go from building on these strategies that are more local, but really achieving impact at scale? And I'm trained as a social epidemiologist, so I'm from public health. And one of the things that is a kind of core insight of public health is that if you you need to reach a lot of people. And if you reach a lot of people, even if the reduction that you achieve per person is less, overall, you could have a much bigger impact. So while our programs in these small things maybe reduce violence by 1/3 or 40%, they're reaching so few people at this point that we can actually have much more impact through something like this economic transfers program or social protection programs, where on average we see about a 7 or 10% reduction. But they're reaching millions of people because government are already investing in these for poverty reduction and all sorts of other impacts. So around this time, when we were having this discourse, I started to see these articles coming out of a place that was not unusual, but new, which is the development economics literature. Because up until this point, most of the research has come from either transformed advocates like me that went back and retrained as researchers, or with a strong kind of public health background. Within the last 5 years, though, you've started to see research coming out of development economics. And why that's important is that those people have a skill set, which, I mean, I can do the work, but it's not my kind of training, is to really figure out how do you use rigorous techniques to look at impact at scale. Because they're looking at labor policies or things. And when I want to figure out impact, I do a randomized controlled trial. You can't divide a country and give half something and half something else. So they have developed a skill set, which is sort of missing some in public health, that really allows you to make causal claims and really evaluate, if you do X, what is its impact? And is it because you did X, right? And so we started to see these interesting articles coming out and looking at things like inheritance laws and its impact on levels of IPV, or something like divorce liberalization. And I thought, I wonder how much of that, like what's really there, because we've never really looked. Sorry to say, but we really haven't plumbed that literature. So that's when I reached out to Rachel at the bank, and we started to say, let's really go and look and see what we can find. So if you want to go to the next slide, what we did then is we really, we're not going to the next slide, but that's fine. Okay, so what we did then, we decided to actually try to do a comprehensive review of what existed. And to my surprise, quite frankly, we found about 140 or 150 studies, we'd have to go back and look exactly, that actually evaluated a causal claim between a policy shift or a legal shift and reductions in either IPV or sexual assault. That's a big evidence base in our field, at least. And so we decided, let's actually summarize this and see, what do we know now, and what do we need to do in order to strengthen that evidence base, so that hopefully we could present a menu of options to governments that says, look, if you do this, you have a high likelihood of seeing reductions over time. And right now, a lot of the emphasis that we have placed as both the women's movement and governments has been on refining the domestic violence law, or the marital rape law, or the FGC law. And we haven't broadened our vision to really think about, are there other kinds of policies and laws that could make a difference? So if you go to the next slide, what you'll see is the policy domains that we actually were able to bucket these studies into. So what we've done, and we're almost done, is we've looked at education policy, we've looked at alcohol regulation, social protection policies, infrastructure investment, justice sector reforms, health and services, family law, labor market policies, and leadership and political will. That's kind of a slush fund. A lot of things are falling in there right now. But anyway, if you go to the next slide, I'll tell you what I mean by these buckets. So within any one bucket, so let's say family law, there's a bunch of different policies, right? So it could be introducing no-fault divorce. It could be something in a child custody law. It could be mandatory marriage registration. So within each of these buckets, there's a lot of different policies that have been looked at. And then there's some policy that no one's looked at, right? And one of our challenges has been that most of this work has been rigorous but haphazard, in the sense that some economist somewhere on a team decided, let's look at this because they had some data or whatever. But it wasn't strategic. It wasn't like, these are the questions that we really want to answer. These are the things where they're actually viable. This is where we think theoretically we might see a difference. So what we want to do is take this baseline then and develop a research program that actually can really refine our knowledge, that's geared on what are the, a research agenda that's strategic. Next slide. So just to give you a sense of sort of what the potential of this is this was like just looking at one program in Bangladesh. Okay, this was the secondary school stipend program that the government implemented to pay school tuition and give small cash stipends to girls and their families to cover things like books or transport. Conditioned on meaning they had to maintain their grades and stay in school. Now, if you can hit it again, sorry. What you'll see is if you project the impact that this program had, which only went on for a period of a certain amount of time, but if you take the girls that were involved in that program who stayed in school, we in effect avoid almost 1 million cases of IPV over time. So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, these girls stayed in school. This was the impact of that. They went back many, let's see, 2007, and I think, yeah. So they went back a decade later and looked. And what you're seeing is that there's 1 million fewer girls or women now who are experiencing IPV than you would have predicted. So these are the kinds of impacts we have to get to if we're going to have an impact at the population level. So then the final slide. Oh, that's you. You stuck yourself in it. Go for it. All right, now, just to give you a little bit more detail there, is I'm going to turn it over to Rachel, and she's going to tell you some more examples like this.
Except that I see that the slide is blank. Thank you, Lori. I don't think this slide is animated, so if you could hit again, it is animated. Oh, back one, sorry about that. So I think that Lori and many of the other speakers today have made a really good case for why focus on policy reform. And many of the policies that are reviewed in this evidence synthesis could be motivated by a host of different factors, right? You might want to reform legislation or your laws because you're motivated by human rights concerns. You might want to expand access to education because you want to invest in human capital development. So I guess one might ask, what is the added value of this social science research that's looking very carefully at the causal impact on rates of violence? And I would like to provide a few examples from this body of evidence that I think highlight why it is useful to have and to catalog this type of rigorous evidence of the impact of policies on rates of violence against women. So first, a few examples from education, building on what Lori has just said. There have been studies of policies, a few different types of policies that expand access to secondary schooling in Bangladesh, China, Kenya, Uganda, Peru, Turkey, and Zimbabwe. And all of these studies show that expanding access to secondary schooling can reduce rates of intimate partner violence. And that's violence, it's not violence occurring while those girls are in school, it's reducing the violence they experience in their lifetimes. So that's really important. And this is that having this body of evidence is helpful for building a case for investing in secondary schooling as one piece of a prevention framework. The second thing that I would highlight from this education research, and here Lori has totally stolen my thunder, is the magnitude of the reductions that can be achieved in some of these examples. So I think it bears repeating what Lori just said, this Bangladesh example, the female secondary school stipend program led to, when you look at the lives of those girls when they advance to become young women and get married, 900,000 fewer young women experienced intimate partner violence because of that investment in secondary schooling. That's huge, and that's a really critical advocacy tool. So that's another piece that we can bring from this evidence base. And then the last thing I will say about education, the education studies, is that across the studies, we see that schooling does not seem to be reducing rates of violence by changing attitudes. It's not the content of the curriculum that seems to make a difference that's driving the change. Instead, what we see is that girls who stay in school longer tend to marry different kinds of men. And it's the partner, it's the marriage match that's making a difference here. Women who stay in school longer tend to marry less violent men. And knowing the how, the mechanism of impact really gives us ideas about other policy avenues to explore. So, first of all, we don't have studies included in our review of national policies on, for example, comprehensive sexuality education, but one could wonder if the impact of education could be strengthened further by including certain elements in the curriculum. Also, I think it highlights that, as we already know, engaging men and boys in violence prevention is really critical. So those are some of the things that you can learn from the studies on the education policies. If you don't mind going to the next slide, I have some examples from the evidence on family law. And sorry again about the animation, but if you could click forward too. Two things I will highlight from family law. First is that there have been reforms in many countries to give women equal rights to initiate divorce. And very importantly, this includes allowing women to seek a divorce without requiring consent from their spouse. And that's critical because that requirement for consent can constrain women's ability to exit a violent relationship. We have found research from Egypt, Mexico, Rwanda, Spain, and the United States that shows that easing access to divorce for women can reduce rates of intimate partner violence. And these research findings, again, they're really important for advocacy. Yesterday, I attended this wonderful session, Esther was also there, hosted by the Global Campaign for Equality in Family Law. And in their advocacy, they are highlighting this research because it's really critical to have that evidence. The second thing here that I would highlight from this research, again, it's about mechanisms. It's about how is the policy affecting rates of violence. And what we see in the body of evidence is that in many of the contexts where divorce laws reforms have been studied, the reforms don't lead to the decrease in violence because they're leading to increases in divorce. Let me try saying that a different way. So it's not so much that women are leaving violent relationships following these divorce law reforms. Instead, primarily, the most prominent trend in the research is that by making divorce more accessible, it enables women to credibly threaten to leave their relationships if they're being mistreated. And that leads to reductions in violence within intact marriages. And this is an important point to highlight because what it's showing is that strengthening women's rights in marriage actually strengthens families. All right, so one last example I'll give, and Lori also sort of touched on this one. This is from social protection programs. As Lori mentioned, there is now a large body of evidence showing that cash to women in households experiencing poverty can lead to reductions in intimate partner violence. And those decreases they're mostly driven by reductions in financial stress in households and reductions in the need to constantly negotiate over how to meet basic daily needs. This evidence is important because it can allay fears among policymakers, and this is something that we see a lot in our work, the work of my colleagues at the World Bank. And I want to, on this one, just give one concrete example. So based on this evidence base showing that social protection programs, that cash transfers to households experiencing poverty can reduce rates of intimate partner violence, the government of Ethiopia was interested in making a change to their national social protection program. Historically, their program has designated men as the default beneficiary or the default recipient of cash transfers. And they were interested in potentially changing that to make women the default recipient of cash transfers. And they were inspired by this body of evidence. Again, a reason to bring this all together. But they were nervous about making that change because nobody had ever studied the impact of switching already enrolled households. And so they partnered with some of my colleagues and colleagues from another research institute and piloted this in one region where they made the switch for already enrolled households. They changed the designated recipient of the cash to women. And luckily, what the research found was that this did not lead to an increase in intimate partner violence. And so now having that evidence, the government is preparing in the next phase of the program to scale this up nationally in their flagship social protection and poverty reduction program. So I share this just as an example to illustrate how having this evidence base can really inspire additional policy experimentation and can help us find ways of reducing violence against women and girls at a large scale. And now, Lori, I'd like to turn back to you to say where we're going from here.
Can you do the next slide then? So what we really want to do, we sort of have a 5-year agenda. As I said, we are developing based on like where we're at. We've brought together a group of researchers who are interested in this area and identified some priority questions and things that we can pursue. And one of the things that's really exciting to me as someone who's used to doing big impact evaluations that cost like $1 million is this is all kind of secondary research. So it's kind of like we want to look at what happens when you, let's say, if you change the policy of women being able to access maintenance or alimony or child support. You can then go and look for where has that changed, which countries have actually done that, and then you can look for the secondary data that allow you to actually answer that question. And those kinds of studies are $25,000. So you can do a lot of research and really quickly develop this evidence base. The second pillar is to really work and start to have conversations with governments and through multi-development banks and others who are having these policy dialogues so that we can really get people to be thinking a little bit differently and seeing more options. And the third is finally with women's organizations. And I mean, if we look historically, where women's rights organizations and groups have traditionally spent their energy has been on violence-specific laws. And while they're important for accountability and all sorts of things, they're not necessarily the most significant in terms of reducing overall levels of violence. And so we want to start a discussion with those who are advocating with governments to be thinking more broadly and understanding what the kind of option list is, and especially if there's already an initiative going on in their country around some policy, where to bring extra energy to that effort from folks interested in violence. So that's the goal, and now we just need to get money to do the goal. But yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Laurie and Rachel. And definitely, these new causal pathways for reduction of violence, it will be groundbreaking because at UN Women, the World Bank Group, and others, we do work a lot with governments to change laws and policies together as well with our civil society partners. So it would be, and we know instinctively that this really reduces the stressors of everyday life, but having the evidence there, it would be really important for us to advocate with policymakers and governments. And this is exactly the next segment of the discussion. And I know we're running late, but it was very interesting. So thank you very much, the three of you and our colleagues online. And now I would like to invite the next panelists, because we would like to hear now from policymakers, governments, and civil society, to what extent you found what we presented useful. How do you think it will be useful for your work? So I would like to invite Ms. Sandra Esteves Zorrilla. Please join me here. Ms. Rachel Grant from the UK. Ms. Esther Guayero from Equality Now. And we're having online Her Excellency Ms. Maha Ali, Secretary General of the Jordanian National Commission for Women. And Your Excellency, Ms. Maha Ali, I would like to start with you. You heard now all these discussions and presentations around the EVAWG index, as well as the prevention policies initiative. And in Jordan, you have done a lot of work in addressing violence against women and girls. So if you could share with us a little bit, how has that data and evidence helped the government to inform your responses to addressing violence against women and girls? And how do you think these new initiatives that you heard about before is going to shape your thinking on how you advance your work in Jordan? You're having the floor.
Good morning, and I'm really happy to join you. It's a great pleasure to be with you today and speak before you on this important topic. I listened to the previous interventions and the presentations, and I believe they are very informative and important to support organizations like the organization I represent in better recommending policy reforms as well as legal reforms. The issue of data and the evidence, the creation of evidence to support policymaking is really important, because this is part of strengthening institutions, improving the way policies are being developed, as well as how they are being implemented, and to ensure that our efforts lead to impactful, practical, and measurable outcomes, especially when we address an issue like gender-based violence or violence against women and girls, which is in many cases an area that is difficult to capture in figures and in quantitative measures. So having or improving the framework of data and analysis of data and how to inform policymaking is definitely important. Another area, when we look at legislative reform, it is important, but on its own, it does not really guarantee the change that we aim for. Effective implementation requires clear strategies, it requires institutional policies, it requires data, accountability, and in addition to raising awareness. And in Jordan, we do have a quite successful experience when it comes to coordinating national efforts to combat violence against women and girls. We do have a national team for family protection where government, NGOs, as well as experts sit on the same table with regular meetings to discuss policies, to discuss implementation of the national. Also, we have a law that addresses family protection, and it mainly focuses on GBV and how to address this issue either through legal procedures or through working with the families themselves and how to support solving these issues. So looking at prevention as well as protection services that are provided by the government as well as by a number of civil society organizations. So coordination among the different players in the area of prevention and protection from gender-based violence is important. The laws by themselves, they establish rights. National strategies, policies, and implementation mechanisms provide the infrastructure that turns those rights into tangible outcomes. This cannot work alone without raising the awareness also of women themselves as well as the society in order to address social norms, to have more positive social norms towards women, towards having stable and peaceful families. So this is an area that we as the Jordanian National Commission for Women are active in, as well as civil society organizations in Jordan. Actually, we lead an annual campaign in the country. We lead the national efforts with coordination with government as well as civil society organizations in order to highlight the importance of combating violence against women and girls, its negative impact on the female itself, as well as on the family and the society. So we do have also in place a national plan for combating violence against women. This has helped in coordinating the efforts of different players in this area. The National Women's Strategy also has among its priorities the issue of gender-based violence, social norms, to how to work with the females, work with females at the level of schools, universities, and women also in different categories within the society. By raising awareness, knowing about the rights that they have in the law, and also by providing information about prevention as well as protection services that are provided, because we realize that many of the females do not know or are not willing to file a complaint if they were subjected to a certain type of violence, especially if it's a domestic violence or from within a member of the family. So working with data has helped us a lot in understanding better the situation of GBV in the country, to know more about possible reasons. It's not always easy to capture the reasons behind or the causation behind gender-based violence, but also data helped us to see where are we really investing, where should we invest more, where we need maybe to create more partnerships, etc. The Department of Statistics in Jordan has been providing evidence-based, gender-based data and statistics since 2005. These sets of data cover women's participation in the economy, social aspects, political participation, as well as data related to violence against women. So we have some data that is based on surveys that identifies the percentage, for example, of women who have been subjected to a certain type of violence from a husband or from a family member who has a complaint or who was subjected to, who was a survivor of violence, but did not really take any legal action. So these types of data help us in knowing better how the violence is being perpetrated in the country, in which cities, the geographical distribution, age, etc. It helps us. In order to get more understanding of violence in Jordan and how it's affecting our policy making, we conducted a study back in 2022 in collaboration with ESQA, as well as UN Women and the Department of Statistics in Jordan. This study came up with an estimation of the economic cost of domestic violence in Jordan. It gave lots of important insights about GBV. For example, it gave us information about an approximate amount of cost estimated, which was equivalent to around 0.4% of the national GDP. It also provided us information. It's the first of its kind to be conducted in the country, and it helped us in also identifying issues related to financial and administrative data from government ministries and service providers, where it gave better also a clearer picture about prevalence, about lost productivity, some kinds of impact on the female herself as well as the family when it comes as a survivor of violence. It also identified the costs associated with healthcare services, shelters, social support programs, legal aid, justice sector interventions, and perpetrator also related expenses. How did we make use of this study? So we looked at the recommendations that came up of the study, and one of the areas of analysis of the study, for example, that showed us that around 1.5% of total expenditures were directed toward prevention, while 27% were directed or were spent on protection and response services. So this showed us that the area of prevention needs more attention and needs more focus in our national policies. So one of the areas where we worked on is to address this issue, is to work more and have more efforts on the area of raising awareness of females themselves, also on the issue of access to justice and how to ensure that women know and are able to access legal aid, as the study showed that around 13% of survivors reported needing legal aid, yet only about 5% reported receiving legal services. So based on this, we worked on mapping legal aid services in the country, and we identified weaknesses, we identified areas that need more support, and we also launched an online platform under the name Know More, and this platform addresses women by providing information on protection services available in the country, including legal aid services. This is an attempt to help women as much as we can by providing the needed information. It also has frequently asked questions from women survivors of violence, because we also realize that many women do not know if, for example, that there's a shelter that they can go to, and if they go to the shelter, what would happen with their children, what would happen, lots of details
Yes.
they need to be aware of. And finally, we looked at the issue of economic empowerment as a means for helping women to address violence, and also to support themselves and to protect themselves from violence. Because from early studies, it shows that women who are economically independent are less to be subjected to domestic violence, and being also economically empowered would help them not to continue to be in the cycle of violence and to be able to leave this cycle of violence. Finally,
excellent.
The issue of GRB, gender responsive budgeting. This is also an area that is very much connected to GBV and to how to have effective combating gender-based violence policies by having the right allocations in the budget. So again, the study that was conducted on estimating the cost of violence showed that there are certain areas that are not fully funded, or that need to be more focused on, and to have more, let's say, to redirect allocations when it comes to the general budget. So this helps also with the GRB effort that is being done in the country with the support of the General Budget Department, where we've worked with 4 pilot ministries to ensure that their budgets for certain programs are gender sensitive, and make sure that there are applications that address priorities. So I would conclude by addressing the issue, the importance of the issue of data. In Jordan, a lot of steps were taken in order to improve our data collection and availability of data. But of course, more support is needed. There is always more room of improvement as data makes the invisible visible. Violence against women often remains hidden and underreported. Reliable data allows governments to understand the scale and cost of the problem. And my second point in my concluding remarks is that data strengthens evidence-based policy, and this would enable governments to better design effective preventive and protection mechanisms, as well as to better address the economic and social impact of violence. Investing in data definitely allows governments to shift from reactive responses toward strategic prevention, ensuring that policies address the root causes of violence rather than only its consequences. Our experience demonstrates that we can invest in we have invested in robust national data systems.
Yes.
This will continue, of course, within the modernization vision of the country, and this would definitely help in providing evidence-based support to policymaking in the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for this great intervention. I'm afraid we have the room only for a few more minutes. So I know it won't be very fair, but if I can ask the rest of our panelists to give us your presentations 2-3 minutes, so to make sure we cover all of you. Unfortunately, Catalonia had to leave. They had an intervention, but Your Excellency, Ms. Andrea Esteves Zorrilla, Vice Minister of Preventive Security in Vulnerable Sectors in the Ministry of Interior and Police of the Dominican Republic. Same question for you. How do you think this work is going to inform your legal and policy reforms? You're having the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here. Actually, I'm excited to know all the process about behind the index, because the index is something that we really appreciate, and we are thinking to work more with the index. So I'm happy for that. For the Dominican Republic, we deeply value the evidence-based approach. In recent years, we have been strengthening our system for information management, monitoring, and data analysis in order to improve the design our public policies related to violence prevention and citizen security. This includes three aspects mainly. On data registration and analysis system, improving interinstitutional coordination of data production, and using evidence to guide public policy decisions and prioritize interventions in the most vulnerable territories and population in the Dominican Republic. For example, we recently organized a training on the measurement of feminicide stands out as an excellent example of effective interinstitutional coordination. It was organized by United Nations Office on Drugs together with the city security data analysis. But the mainly learning about this is how the strategy we can use as we are currently evaluating the implementation of the strategy plan for a life free of violence, which require a retrospective assessment of what has worked, what has not worked, and which elements must be strengthened in order to improve the state's comprehensive response to violence. In this process, data allow us to prioritize interventions, improve the quality of public spending, and better understand the structural dynamics that sustain violence. Based on this experience, I would like to share 3 reflections only to resume. First, recognize the importance of criminalization alone does not constitute a complete response. However, has been emphasized in several discussions during this commission, it is essential to name the violence in order to eradicate it. In this regard, we have been promoting a comprehensive legal reforms to ensure that the different forms of violence against women are autonomously recognized in the legal framework. The second is public policies require a coordinated state response, not just one institution, not a coordinated one. One of the major challenges we face is the standardization of information system. We don't have necessarily the same standards in every institution to make our data. And our data generation and the data analysis is indispensable. Having a strong information system allows us to understand not only the characteristics of victims, but also the context and dynamics in which violence occurs. Finally, I would like to emphasize that advancing towards the eradication of violence against women requires evidence-based public policies, coordinated institutions, and sustainable international cooperation. That's why spaces like this are so essential to share lessons and learned strength capacities and move toward increasingly effective prevention and response system. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Really important reflections. We really try to. Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. And now I would like to turn to Ms. Rachel Grant, Senior Advisor for Online Safety at the United Kingdom's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And Rachel, FCDO, the UK government, has been a significant leader in the area of ending violence against women and girls, especially for research through the What Works for Prevention program, but also through data, and your personal leadership in technology facilitated gender-based violence through the global partnership. So share with us, what do you think? How can we combine the findings from What Works together with legal and policy reforms to sustain the results of your research and what we do through the What Works for Prevention? You're having the floor.
Thanks, Calliope, and thank you for having me here today. It's a real honor. Thank you.
As you say, the UK has really taken an evidence-based approach to trying to change and drive action on stopping violence against women and girls. And that led to, and the 1 in 3 figure was really instrumental in capturing attention from ministers, and the fact that it was so robust allowed people to sort of pull it apart and they didn't have an excuse to not act. So it gave us the resources we needed to do the What Works program, which really was saying, if we know there's a problem, and how do we know it's preventable? Let's do some robust analysis. And so we did the first stage of What Works, which was about understanding what works. And then the second stage is what works at scale. We talked about how it needs to go beyond communities and be integrated across systems. How do we make that case, including to other sectors? How can stopping violence against women, and we heard a great example earlier, have a wider impact, for example, on educational outcomes? Really, it has driven huge attention and progress. And the UK government now has an incredibly ambitious domestic mission to halve VAWG in a decade. And the UK's Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper, in December announced an international mission to meet the same target. So they're really taking it seriously. We have an excellent set of ministers who are so committed to really making a change. But it doesn't stop. And we talked about TFGBV, and the UK co-chairs the Global Partnership for Action on Gender-Based Online Harassment and Abuse, which UN Women is a key part of. And together we've been looking at, it's no longer a new front, it's just the new reality that digital violence is there, and it's a problem that we are fighting every day. We see new types of harms emerging. For example, this year we've seen what the dangers that chatbots, AI-generated chatbots, can deliver in terms of intimate image abuse. And so UN Women are doing brilliant work on developing new measurement frameworks. We are thinking through new interventions. For example, I was really struck hearing the normative work that's been done in the GBV space that's now being applied online. How do we work at scale with moderators in gaming chat rooms, for example, to share those normative approaches? And then I'm rushing. The other point I wanted to make, so it's actually, interestingly, it's actually moving too fast for the evidence. And so then what? Then the lived experience becomes critical and advocacy becomes essential. And actually what we're seeing is parents, for example, concerned about their children driving huge changes. The UK is passing legislation by the day, it feels like, particularly in terms of image-based abuse. And really that's driven by real-world events. So the evidence is essential, and we have to do both. We have to do that thoughtful long-term piece, and then we also have to do the active, proactive, moving fast. So we're trying to do it all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And UN Women is so proud of partnering with the UK government in so many different fronts. And now, last but not least, Esther Guayero, Associate Director, Legal Equality. Equality Now, such a significant partner. Equality Now for legal and policy reforms around the world. So, same question to you. How do you think what we've heard today is going to help the civil society advocacy for effecting legal and policy reforms? 2-3 minutes, because then we would like to turn to the European Union in the room.
Great. Thank you so much, Calliope, and good morning to everyone. Thank you. It's a delight for me to be here to bring the civil society perspectives and the voice into this conversation. I will try to speak in the 2 to 3 minutes that you've given me. I hope I don't turn myself into a rapper in the process. But to help me, I've just kind of structured my thoughts around 6 main reflections, and I'll move quickly through them. But I'll start by saying that for women's rights advocates, evidence and data is absolutely critical, because when gender advocates do not have access to reliable gender data, then the gaps in policies and protections only widen. And so the reflections that I will offer will speak to certain examples in which we have used data, but also to demonstrate how the tools such as the index and the policies for prevention initiative can actually continue supporting us as women's rights organizations in our work. So the first is around the fact that data visibilizes violence against women and girls, especially in terms of demystifying the myth that violence is rare or these are isolated cases. It shows that violence is really a widespread issue, and there is an urgent need for duty bearers then to address this. But it also tells us about prevalence, who, where, and how they are affected, including who is responsible and where the gaps are in addressing VAWG. Most importantly, when it comes to visibilizing, it also helps us to shape public narratives and mobilize support through humanizing issues through survivor-centered qualitative evidence. The second one is helping us in holding governments accountable. And we have used data, and data such as the one that is envisioned is going to help us to justify or to show where gaps are, particularly in tracking implementation of national action plans and national budgets, as well as service provision. But as civil society organizations, we also have the duty and responsibility of submitting shadow reports to UN and regional mechanisms. And so we rely a lot on data, and this is only going to help us in this initiative. The third area is around helping us in setting advocacy priorities, whether that be law reform or national level, other initiatives at the national level. It's important to center all this around the data. And indeed, we have done that using the World Bank Women, Business and the Law data, which we have heavily referenced in one of our reports as Equality Now on Africa family law laws in 20 countries. And out of that data, we have prioritized direct interventions in 12 of the 20 countries that we focused on. And since 2024, we're working with national level actors to drive national law reform initiatives. Similarly, just in the way that under the ACT project, for instance, we are implementing in the East and Southern Africa countries, and we have data that is coming out from 13 countries that we have used together with influencers, as I said, to visibilize the issue of VAWG. We're also in the process of publishing IEC materials in respect of 10 countries on violence against women and girls laws and policies that really shows where gaps are or where implementation isn't really progressing in the way that we need. And so this data, again, which has been crystallized into these IEC materials, will help us in national level advocacy. The fourth way is because this data provides a common evidence base, and so it's easier to bring in state and non-state actors together across different countries and regions to be able to use that as a shared framework that will enable cross-sector dialogues on violence against women and girls. The fifth area is on advancing legal and policy reform advocacy. And I won't delve into that. I spoke about the 10 countries that we're focusing on. The sixth one is, which is the last one, is on strengthening movements, coalition building, and fostering collaboration. Because when we have these tools that are standardized and cross-regional, it then makes it easier for us to come together on a shared agenda using a shared framework that will help us to then advance programming and projects where we also bring on board non-traditional stakeholders. And under the ACT project, one of the things that we are doing as Equality Now and the Solidarity for African Women's Rights Coalition is to work with non-traditional allies. So traditional and religious leaders, influencers, as I mentioned, and one of the campaigns that we actually launched last year is called Stop the Count campaign, which utilized existing data on legislative and policy gaps in 13 countries in Eastern and Southern Africa. And so to wrap it up, we're excited. I was very excited listening to the earlier panel, Rachel, Lois, about this index, and I can't wait for it to be launched so that we can advance our work using it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry for rushing you. It was an excellent intervention. And now I would like to invite Ms. Irena Muzova, Deputy Director General for Justice and Consumer at the European Commission. Please, you're having the floor. And the thought leadership of the European Union, and especially under your leadership, so many legal and policy reforms at the European Union level, and of course the support to women's rights organizations and through the ACT program, Spotlight, we're really grateful. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, Calliope. Actually, your way of welcoming me on the podium gives me a bit of the surprise. Of course, the European Union is very active in the field, inside and outside, but at the same time, so I'm very much knowledgeable about the time. So I will try to be very brief in my intervention. And just to commend you, also the distinguished guests, speakers, excellencies, because if we really want to be sure that we can address the violence against women with all the complexity, we really need to have a good insights in the key things to address. Because without that, so we will not get the necessary political attention and also the adequate public funding, because many of you address it as well. So to combat gender-based violence, you need a very comprehensive approach, including legislation with criminalization of the most serious acts of gender-based violence, but also a good focus on prevention, protection, and support for victims. And this is indeed not possible without having data, fundamental for the evidence-based policymaking and monitoring. Now, I give you a clear example, because also in the European Union, so we haven't had a comprehensive data with a solid methodology across all the member states. And we have been facing also the situation that not all the member states, when we launched the first surveys through the Eurostat, were actually wishing to participate and arguing that they have a national data. But then it's very difficult to engage in the tools addressing this phenomenon, which is also cross-border more and more in the digital area. So when you do not have these data. And from this perspective, so first we have a small survey, then we enlarge it, and we even finance it for those member states wishing to do so. And those not wishing, so they've been covered by, not by the Eurostat surveys, but those organized by the European Institute on Gender Equality and Fundamental Rights Agency, to have at least small sample, but still comparable data. On that basis, we have been able to come with the really milestone legislation, Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence Directive, which is focusing precisely the elements that you have been now also interpreting in the index. So very much about the prevention, very much about the access to justice, not necessarily the social reforms as a previous speaker was addressing, because it's going a little bit beyond the scope, because here we are speaking about the criminalization. But yes, we have been able to already start with the criminalization of the cyber violence as really one of the pioneering legislative norm. And as one part of this directive, which is now being transposed and will be in force next year, we have also obligation to the member states to collect the data, participate in those horizontal data gathering in order to have, again, the meaningful input for our decision making. So from this perspective, indeed, the data collection is a kind of the political instrument because it shows where the gaps persist, where also the budgets fall short and need to be improved, and also where to focus in having really tangible and good results. And from this perspective, let me only say that the revelation of the index today was really a source of great inspiration. That's also on it's not always so evident when you invest in projects. You not always have the pleasure to see the newborn baby, which is today. So let me congratulate you and all the speakers as well, because I think that you gave us this very valuable tool, which goes much beyond just the simple data on the violence against women, which is unfortunately still very persistent. So I believe that this index will really help us to cross the gap between let's say, the problem and also the policy engagement. And let me say that I'm really proud of not only Spotlight, but also ACT's program, because this is really the investment in the data are sustained and translated into policy dialogue and reforms worldwide, well, with the exception of those countries that I think 44 countries were excluded due to the lack of the data. So I'm very happy that we, as a European Union, we will continue supporting through the Act those organizations to use the data more actively in the advocacy and policy engagement. Currently, we have supported 75 organizations, and we believe that we will go beyond, because, yeah, the ending of the violence against women is not optional. It is a matter of the rights, it is a matter of the rule of law and the equality. So thank you very much for your personal engagement, for supporting us mutually, because some of you also said that it is a collective, no, it was, I think, Sarah who said it at the beginning. It is a collective responsibility, but also the very fact that we are addressing these phenomena together makes us stronger and actions much more impactful. So thank you very much for being part of it and for creating this enable environment for all of us to progress, hopefully successful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Musova, for this really inspiring, concluding reflections. We really appreciate it. And thank you, colleagues, for being here this morning with us. I'm sure that we're going to see you around at the Secretariat or in this building. A lot is happening. We're getting to a very good side event later with the UK, and Rachel already spoke about the campaign of having violence in the next decade. Conference roommate, right? I'm promoting the event now. Thank you so much, colleagues, and see you around. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And thank you, the colleagues online.